Welcome to our study session of the Gilbert Town Council, September 23rd, 2014. Agenda item number 1 is to review items in preparation for a Thursday night. I will begin with some assignments. Councilmember Cooper, if you could introduce the Scouts. Councilmember Taylor, if you could do proclamation number 1. Councilmember Peterson, if you could do proclamation number 2. And if the mayor and vice mayor could do number 3, we'll do it together, and then I'll focus on the first part of that, and then let you do the second part of our fire captain. Councilmember Daniels, I understand Councilmember Ray probably will be trying to call in on Thursday. Is that correct? Is that our understanding? If for some reason he's here, we'll give him 5, but for right now to Councilmember Daniels, we'll give you 4 and 5. And if he comes, he'll do 5. And that's both related to Higley Unified School District. Do those assignments work? Yep. Thank you. Related to other agenda items, in preparation today, do we have, I'll start with Councilmember Peterson, items you would like to have discussed today? Number 9. Vice Mayor Cook?
I know this is under the public hearing, but I would love just an update for the Bordeaux project. Just
is that number 30?
That's 30, and possibly, I'm not concerned about 31, but I'd just love to have them review what we're going to have for 30 on Thursday.
I also had 30 down, so Councilmember Taylor? Councilmember Daniels? Yeah, no. Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 9. Councilmember Peterson.
Mayor, this is actually the other component of number 30 you were just speaking about it. So it's related to the Bordeaux project, and this is basically an agreement for deferred development. And the big question for me on this is just what are, I read through the agreement, and I'm not sure it's in there, but what the trigger would be for us as a town, and maybe we're just leaving this to our discretion, but what the trigger would be for us to decide to go forward with development.
Councilmember Peterson, I don't think you mean number 9. That's Williamsfield and Higley intersection. I just want to make sure we're on board.
No, hold on. You're probably right. Let me see which number it is then. Sorry.
30 and 31.
It's the agreement, deferred development agreement, whatever number that is.
Okay.
What? I thought it was on consent.
Yeah, maybe
do I just still have a draft agenda?
Let's
embarrassing.
Let's talk 30 and 31 because that was such an extensive discussion in a council meeting. I think it will help us to have an update and some information. So Amy, if you could give us a study session overview of 30 and 31, please.
Good afternoon, Mayor Lewis and members of council. Basically, at July 31st, we had the hearing regarding Bordeaux. It was an appeal, and staff was directed. We took the amalgamation of all the comments that were made by town council and neighbors and everybody that evening and tried to come together and talk about what could we do to the Bordeaux cross-section to make it appealing to everyone involved. And so we sat down as staff and after talking to the neighbors after the hearing that night, and we came up with an alternative cross-section which is reflective of one of the ones we presented that evening, which is the deferred payment of development funds for the pavement portion of 172nd Street. So the cross-section would now be that there's landscape with a decomposed granite trail, there's no street lights, there's no concrete sidewalk. There is, one of the differences from what we talked about that evening was we were not going to have a curb and gutter, but we decided that there needed to be a curb and gutter because the existing KV lines that are there, the large electrical pole lines, were going to be right near a future roadway. And we decided that if in the future that was built, we needed to have a vertical separation, and that engineering thought that having the vertical curb was very important, because then we would have an available 5-foot bike lane, a 12-foot traffic lane, and a 7-foot center turn lane for a collector road in the future. Now, if in the future, when that roadway construction does go through, the land to the east, which is still in the county, is not acquired as part of a capital improvement project, then there is still room on this half section to accommodate two-way traffic. So the 7-foot center turn lane and the 5-foot bike lane joined together to become the second travel lane. But in the interim, in the 10 years that's allotted for within the development deferred agreement, the only things that would be constructed are the landscape and the decomposed granite trail. And then from the back entry gate of the Bordeaux subdivision, where we have actuated gates, you got a clicker to go in and out, there would be emergency access and access for the neighborhood, meaning the Bordeaux residents. There would be a ribbon strip of asphalt going from that gated access to the existing right-of-way of 172nd Street. At one point in time, we did talk about doing full improvements from that point south, but we determined that that was not feasible, that it was better to just leave it as a ribbon strip at that point, for now. So we have 10 years to work toward figuring out whether this is going to become part of a capital improvement project, whether the general plan is going to be amended to change the word collector from 172nd Street, or whether there's maybe going to be a bigger look at this whole area of the South Gilbert, Santan, Hunt Highway area. So that is where we were at. We sent the revised preliminary plat to the neighborhood, and they took it. It was right around the rainstorm time, so they got a little distracted in there, but they said that overall they liked the idea and they were in support, except they still were having an issue with the word collector. We, as I stated in my staff report, whether the word collector is there or not, we feel that the width that we're asking for the pavement and right-of-way in total is appropriate, because we may or may not be able to acquire that additional right-of-way on the other half side of the center line in the future. So we can always give land back to landscape, but we can't go and ask for more in the future necessarily if it's already, and we don't want to rip up improvements. One other thing that I'll note is we, from a utility standpoint, there will be a water line that will be put down the appropriate location within the pavement, the future pavement area, so that it is in keeping with our engineering standards of where utilities occur, and it will create the water line loop in the area which is needed. I hope that explains everything.
Mayor?
Dialogue. Councilmember Peterson, or Councilmember Cooper, as I look over here.
Just wanted to, so the neighbors, they don't like the designation of collector or whatever. Yeah, but doesn't that also infer they don't really like the right-of-way take, or what?
Correct, Councilmember Cooper. They feel that because we're still calling it a collector, we're asking for too much right-of-way. But our response to that was, regardless of whether you call it local collector or whatever you want to call it, we still potentially need to get two-way traffic through there if we can't acquire the other half width. So you can call it whatever you'd like to call it, but per the general plan, we're calling it a collector. But we still need to get 24 feet of drive lane before the vertical curb and gutter. So that's what we're asking for, only in that cross-section it's shown as a 7-foot half-width center line, a center lane, 12-foot drive lane, and the 5-foot bike lane.
Amy, on the agenda, it also talks about the Planning Commission. Since July, has the Planning Commission had a meeting where this was discussed?
Mayor Lewis, this is not going back to Planning Commission, so no, we have not discussed it at Planning Commission.
So the verbiage on the agenda is tied to about the July 12th or so Planning Commission meeting?
That would be correct. It's
Okay.
still held to the Eden agenda.
Okay.
Item.
Councilmember Peterson, do you want to continue to probe?
Yeah, and thanks for, I did have a previous version, and it didn't, anyway, that was confusing. So my question then is, for myself, I can't, as a council member, I can't imagine approving two roads side by side. So if we're taking extra right-of-way in the thought that we would have a full bidirectional on one and then another bidirectional next to each other, I just don't think that makes any sense. I don't think well, I don't know about the rest of the council members. I'm not sure if there's a majority that would support that ever. So I'm not sure that makes sense. And I guess the big question for me is, what is our trigger for going forward with this development? Because to me, unless we're willing to do it right and put some of our own money into it to develop the whole thing, acquire right-of-way as needed next door, I know the neighbors would hate that, but to do it right and not have two streets next to each other, I don't think we should do it. So to me, I'd like something in the agreement that we're saying, we're not going to pull the trigger on this unless we're going to come to the table with money so we can do this properly, not have two streets that are bidirectional next to each other. So that's my only concern. Otherwise, I think everything's fine. But I can't ever see wanting to approve that. I just think it's just kind of strange traffic-wise.
Vice Mayor Cook?
So let's say that we were to acquire the property to the east, and we're able to do our best practices of doing what we do a normal road. Does that other right-of-way lend itself still to a bike trail and all that comfortably? Is that what I'm hearing could happen?
Councilmember Cook, Vice Mayor Cook, depending on how much right-of-way is acquired on the east half, and it was I would anticipate we would acquire the half width that per our development standards for cross sections for whatever level of the street is determined at that period of time. So if the cross section is slightly narrower because it's a local versus a collector, then we would acquire a little less, but then you would still be able to have I know the traffic engineer would still like to have bike lanes on both sides because they feel that in this area it's important. There's horses, there's bikes, and we did do a DG trail on this side so the horses could be accommodated there. But I know that he's indicated that he would like to have the bike lane there, and that is what we're anticipating for the future. So.
Other questions or comments? For Thursday night, you would be prepared with pictures, and I know in the council communication we have a couple of pictures. Do you happen to have any with you right now?
I did not bring the presentation from the July 31st. If you would like me to make sure I have all those pictures available and all the background documentation, I can most certainly have that as part of my presentation, or I can have it as a backup presentation.
Your comments have been helpful in reminding me, and I'm looking at attachment 2. So I can probably figure it out between now and Thursday, but Councilmember Daniels, did you have a comment?
I'm just thinking of different examples in town where we do have a bilateral lane adjacent to another bilateral lane. And I agree with you. I don't think it's an ideal situation, but if that eastern lane in this instance is owned by someone, I don't know that we want to necessarily exercise the right to take that from someone, and yet we still have a need to have traffic move in dual directions on a public right-of-way. So I get what you're saying. I don't think it's ideal, but I can think of Guadalupe, for example, between Greenfield and Higley, where you have that 2 lanes on one side with a small median, and then you have our major or minor, I think a minor arterial right there. So, I mean, there are places in town where we can look to it and we have that situation. Our goal, and I think our end goal, is to provide circulation for citizens who live in this area. And we may have to go with a less than ideal situation in order to accomplish that goal. And maybe there's another solution that we haven't thought of yet too, Mayor, which I know our staff is working diligently to try to find those solutions, but there are examples.
Councilmember Peterson?
So I appreciate that. Thank you. So I guess I'm not clear on what our trigger will be. Are we going to wait for traffic counts to reach a certain level? What is it that we're going to use as our threshold to decide whether or not that road is necessary? Can you help me understand that?
Councilmember Peterson, at this point in time, I don't believe we've identified the threshold, whether it's traffic counts or whether it's a CIP project coming up on the list of items that are going to be addressed in the next year. You know, it's addressed yearly. We look at CIP projects, and if this is rolled into possibly the Record Road CIP project, that could be a trigger for looking at it. It could also be looking at something to do with a general plan update in the future. So we haven't quite identified what's going to be the trigger for this, and staff is still discussing it.
That's really key, I think, for me. And I would think also if I was a resident near there, is just having some sense of what and that's been one of their main questions from day one, is what justifies the need for this road. So if we don't create some objective measure for what that looks like, I mean, we don't want it to be an arbitrary and capricious decision just because there's resources that it's not our money. We just use it because our time is up. We don't want to get in that situation. So I think it would be good if we could come up with some measure that we meet that we know we need it. So, I mean, normally in traffic situations, we do traffic counts, and then there's standards for what you need based on the traffic counts. And so, can we not use that same practice here? I'm just trying to understand that better.
Mayor Lewis.
Eric? Oh,
Excuse me.
please.
I agree with you that we do need to identify what our trigger point is, if you will, that would require this. But if I remember correctly, this is going to be our trigger point will also hinder on whether, when we look comprehensively at the circulation of this area. Now, this is a very rural area, and I think it has different needs, maybe even than any other neighborhood that we've ever looked at, or, section of town that we've looked at, because of sort of the mountains and the views and the desire to see stars. I mean, there's a whole lot of factors. I would rather see us, rather than identify specifically, no matter what happens, if traffic counts get to a certain number, we're going to build this road, that we look at this area in its entirety and say, again, our goal is to allow movement of people in a convenient and safe way. How can we do that comprehensively, not just are we getting to a certain number on this one street? Does that make sense? Why aren't we looking at the area in its entirety rather than just one half roadway?
The only problem I have with that is there's no predictability then. There's no definition that any resident can rely on to know what to expect based on certain conditions, and it's hard for them to understand the justification for the road, and that's been the crux
But we're
of the
trying to
concern.
accommodate these neighbors, and that if we were going to build it just to whatever we predict or expect, we'd be building a full right-of-way right now, because that's what's listed in our general plan. But instead, we're trying to take in the needs of the neighbors in the neighborhood in order to accommodate additional residents in this section of town. And so I hear what you're saying. I just want us to look at this comprehensively rather than individually. If predictability is the number one important factor in this decision, then we're building the full width right-of-way.
It's not just predictability, it's an objective measure that justifies the need for the expenditure and the resource and whatever it is. So that's all. I'm just trying to understand what it is that we will look at to decide whether or not we've reached that point where it's needed. That's all I'm asking for. So,
Councilmember Taylor, did you have a question or comment? Okay, and Vice Mayor Cook, why don't you make your comment, and then we'll turn to Eric.
And I think, when you look in south of the project, there's quite a bit of vacant property that's there. And I believe somewhere in the future, depending on the development of the density of potential homes, those will probably be those triggers that may occur sometime in the future. But I think right now, I'm okay with, where we're going and where we're at, in anticipation somewhere down the road that we might have another council at another time make that decision.
Eric?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Petersons. I think what we're trying to do now, and what we heard loud and clear, and what we've said is we don't need the roadway today, but we definitely we want to preserve that opportunity, and we think that what we've done here is a good compromise. Going back, Councilmember Peterson, to a couple of your questions, we don't necessarily, there is not a threshold that we use throughout the town to build a collector roadway or build an arterial roadway. A lot of that is development driven, and if I could tell you what was going to happen 10 years from now, I would love to be able to do that. I think what we're looking for, and some of the things that we will be looking at as we're reviewing the CIP for this upcoming year, and as we look at this area more in depth, is tying this project along with other roadway improvement projects down there, whether that be Wrecker Road, whether that's Coldwater and Santan Boulevard that runs east-west. So this isn't a standalone, all of a sudden we're going to pave just this road, and hopefully that'll alleviate some of the residents' concerns. I think the issue is we just can't make those decisions within a 4 or 6 week time period. We need to look at it from a more sub-regional level. So there are things we're looking at, and so hopefully that answers some of your questions. There's not a hard and fast number that we can say that we'll be monitoring traffic counts every 6 months, and when it hits this, we'll build the road.
Councilmember Taylor?
Thank you, Mayor. And maybe I've just forgot, have we approached the owners of the private road to see how open they are? Maybe you could just remind me what discussions, if any, we've had there to see, is this, we have to wait till somebody dies to have this discussion, or is it just,
Well, that was the way it went at Planning Commission, unfortunately. The owner announced that she was not going to ever sell that property. She'd have to die first. And that's a quote, and I would never phrase it that way otherwise, but she's very adamant that she is not wanting to annex, she is not wanting to participate. So that is another kink in the whole idea, is that to acquire the land, we have to go through the county, because it's not Town of Gilbert jurisdiction, then bring it in or go through any procedure or process that needs to occur legally if she does not want to cooperate. So there's a number of different layers there. It's not a quick process.
okay, thank you. And for the record, we hope that she lives for a very long time.
Councilmember Peterson, when we started, you brought up agenda item 31, which on the draft had been a different number. Do you want any discussion on 31? Okay. So Amy and Eric, thank you. And there's some dialogue that was helpful for you. I'm not sure if between now and Thursday that changes any of the presentation, but we'll ask you to think about what was brought up with concerns, and we'll continue this discussion on Thursday. The rest of, I didn't see any other items that council wanted to talk about. I will bring up one item, and it's agenda item 23. 23 is the proposed schedule of town council meetings in 2015. There has been one piece of information that came to us related to the calendar, and it's the April 9th meeting. And MCC, Mesa Community College, reached out to us. It is part of their 50th anniversary celebration. They're inviting us to participate in an event that night. And so in talking with our town manager and town clerk, we thought, and I'd bring it up in this meeting, and potentially we could have it adjusted for Thursday night, that without the calendar in front of us, I will describe that we also have an April 30th meeting, and so it would not be a problem to potentially move it to April 16th, stay on Thursday night. It could be, as we've done with a couple of meetings, we've moved them to Tuesday night at 5. And so just to look to the 6 of us tonight to give some feedback to Kathy in preparation for Thursday night. The April 9th meeting, if it were changed, do you have a preference whether it goes to the next Thursday, April 16th, or possibly the Tuesday night, April 14th at 5 p.m.? 16th? Vote for 16th. Tuesday, vote. Okay, we got one-on-one so far.
The 7th or the 14th?
It would be the 14th. So it'd be the 14th at 5 or 16th at 7.
14th.
Okay, 16th, there's 2-1. Whatever. Yes, okay, so let's see, 2-1.
Sounds like 2-1. That's right.
Bridget, what? Okay, I guess we go with the 2-for-1 because I was indifferent too. So to our town clerk, if we could have an addendum for Thursday night that shifts April 9th to April 16th. Thank you. So before we leave Thursday night preparation, I look to my left and look to my right, and now we move back to the study session agenda, and we go to number 2, possible location for the AZ wall project.
So good to have somebody that knows this technology better than I do. Lisa Rigler with Operation Welcome Home and the AZ Wall Project. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to visit with you again this evening regarding the Arizona Wall Project and specifically to address the site selection. We really appreciate the enthusiasm and the support you have shown this far in the process. I also want to take the time to thank all of our committee members who are here and have put so much time and effort in the last few months. I appreciate them so much. They've put in long and hard hours. As you know, this is our third time presenting to you, and certainly it won't be our last. It was at the June study session that we first presented the concept of bringing the Vietnam Wall to Gilbert. We were asked to present to the boards and commissions, and we did so in July and August. And most recently, our team presented to you more of our vision in our August council retreat, where we discussed potential locations. After the retreat, a team from the town took time and energy to look at the property that the town owns to determine which sites were viable, and based upon our criteria and dignity and reverence, as well as the town's criteria. The team identified 3 potential properties: the Gilbert and Elliott site, Nichols Park, and the property just east of the police and fire buildings. As you see, the Arizona Wall Project team prefers the PD site. Our process of analysis included the creating an initial design to determine if the site could properly be laid out and accommodate the necessary elements. When we priced out that design on each property to identify major cost differences between the sites, we will present our findings and show you why we believe the PD site is our best overall location. We chose not to design and price out the Nichols Park for a number of reasons. Nichols Park already has existing programming as well as the potential for expanded programming in the future, according to the park's master plan. Additionally, it was obvious when looking at the site that there would be significant costs involved in filling this large retention basin and digging new retention around it. The site is also located near a water treatment plant, which uses Nichols overflow parking on a daily basis. It was for these reasons that we did not devote more resources into developing this as a potential site and focused our efforts on the Gilbert and Elliott property and the PD property. The next 5 slides are initial renderings that we developed for 2 properties. We do have a small disclaimer. These illustrations are not proposed site designs, but were used as a meaning of determining the validity of the site as well as potential costs. Our construction team did a cost analysis of the design, which represents a fair, inclusive estimation, even if this specific design is not the final. It's important to note that each line item we get in kind, either labor or materials, comes off the cost, and we're very confident that many of these services will be donated. In order to maintain the site at the highest level, for example, at the standard of Arlington Cemetery, staff is projecting $160,000 to $180,000 annually with 1 FTE with the town where they maintain the site in-house. As with the construction of the project, there are many unique opportunities to involve the community and private businesses in donating funds, materials, and services for the maintenance of the site. We have listed some of the examples below. We also do plan on phasing the construction of the site as we meet financial milestones, and this is an example of how we can break down certain elements into different phases. Looking at the sites individually, here we have pros and cons for the Gilbert and the Elliott site. The attractive elements of the site include that this site is part of the gateway into Gilbert, which would both help the project as well as Gilbert. Not only would it be aesthetically pleasing, but it would make a statement about Gilbert's values and character. Obviously, programming is essential to the vision for the Arizona Wall Project, and the connectivity between the museum and the American Legion creates synergy for programming. We believe one of the aims of the town is to encourage pedestrian traffic in the downtown, which is a huge benefit for this project as well. We believe public open space is a crucial element in urban, downtown, and commercial areas. They make them more commercially attractive, bring together a variety of users, and provide built-in capable guardians of the surrounding properties. The Arizona Wall Project touches people all around the country and will attract visitors from surprisingly far-off places. While our priority is not to create more cells in the town, that isn't why a community should do a project like this. We do believe that the town will greatly benefit from the project, especially on Gilbert and Elliott. Visibility, obviously the corner property exposes more potential visitors to the Vittorial and creates more awareness. Lastly, the property is larger, approximately 9 acres, which is a plus. However, moving to the drawbacks, there is a reduced footprint on the site because of lack of inherent parking. That reduces the usable acreage for the experience. One of the biggest challenges of this site, you all know, is parking. We believe it can be overcome. However, we would most likely, at the least temporarily, require the use of the property on the northwest corner. We can build quite a bit of on-site parking, but to meet peak volume would be more challenging. Also, even though we love the visibility of the hard corner, it does present a greater challenge in mitigating sounds on the site. Again, we can do a lot in the way of layout, design, and materials to cut sound, but it would be more difficult. This property does not have the lines to hook into the infrastructure, which isn't ideal. And lastly, this project, as we mentioned, will bring lots of people to Gilbert, and while that is desirable in the downtown, it will create more traffic congestion, both pedestrian and vehicular. Again, the PD site is our preference, and you can see from the pros list why. Even though we love the visibility of the Elliott and Gilbert site, the PD property is set back, which makes it quieter. Having the project near the fire and police departments make it inherently safer. There are always employee vehicles accessing the gate to the west and driving by the site at all hours. There is synergy with the proximity to the other memorials on the town campus, as well as the Operation Welcome Home ceremonies. There is significantly more parking available, and we would be able to stripe about 40 to 60 additional spaces on the site. We love the idea of the 58,300 souls being right on American Heroes Way. The property has a great deal of infrastructure already in place. On the negative sides, we did determine that there was some retention and grading issues, but we have met with town engineers and believe that there are adequate solutions available. Another drawback is that the town would have to manage a shortage, approximately 640 spaces for 2 major events a year at the town hall. And lastly, there is less visibility from the street, which seems to be our trade-off with noise, but we can overcome this with additional wayfinding. So this is the information. Our request is for council is to give us a final direction on a preferred site for the purpose of bringing the Arizona Wall Project to Gilbert. The timing of this is very critical, as having one location is essential to moving forward with every facet of the project. Thank you for your time, and we're here to answer any questions that you have.
Questions or comments? Councilmember Taylor.
Lisa, thanks for the overview and the updated information. Maybe I missed it. What is the available acreage next to the police department?
It's 7 acres approximately.
7, okay.
Councilmember Peterson.
And maybe it's a town staff question, but what is the planned use for that area? Does anyone know the answer to that?
I actually did ask Chief Dorn and Chief Joe Bush, and both said they didn't have any plans for the future of that. I also asked Town Manager Banger, so he might want to add some additional comments.
Sure, Mayor, Councilman Peterson. We do not have any plans for that location at this time or in the future. Now, if the town should enter into new lines of service or need to expand, I'm also comfortable that we've got enough other available ground within the town that we could accommodate those needs. So it wouldn't be taking away from anything that we should need now or in the future.
Vice Mayor Cook.
Lisa, can you put the picture up of the image that's by the police and fire? I just kind of want to visually look at that.
this one.
While you're about to ask your question, is there the parking for that would just be existing parking? So we'd use the 7 acres for the wall, and we wouldn't be adding any parking, is that correct?
No, we would be able to add on the PD parking about 40 to 60
46,
additional
okay.
spaces.
Lisa, can you kind of maybe describe some of the key monuments that surround, because I know you wanted a kind of a pavilion. Can you just kind of highlight where things may be located?
Well, as I said, this is just, it's just a rough draft to make sure we could get the elements on the site. But we have the pavilion. So some of the things we're thinking of would be, over here would be the educational area and where we could store some flags and other things that might be left at the wall. We also have space, here's the wall itself down here. And then we were thinking we could put some of the flag raising areas probably right around this area. And here's a little pavilion right here. And this is the big pavilion.
To Town Manager Banjer, so the land, making that available, would be one ask of the town, and then the maintenance cost, and I think as we've talked, of course, the council can give opinions on that, but it seems as if the feedback is that that's something that the town would feel would be appropriate as part of having this great asset in our community. Do you have any additional feedback on that?
No, there's several variables involved, Mayor, to understanding what the true cost would be, and that will all come down to final design and components that are part of this project. And so I think right now, based on assumptions as presented, that's a cost that we would foresee. Now, which direction that goes in, we know there's been some discussion about potentially entering into some type of operations and maintenance agreement for this facility and this site, in which it wouldn't be the town personnel itself or town contracts, but we would contract with an entity who would then take care of the maintenance and management of the site and events that would be held there. So all questions to be answered once this, the phasing and the eventual scope gets determined, but that's what we see right now.
Thank you. And to our town attorney, because this is town land and we're not selling it, it's more we're finding a use from a town perspective. We don't need to formally do a vote in a public meeting. Well, in a sense, this is a public meeting, but it's more to study and discuss. But we could give direction today, and then we would go full speed ahead. Is that right? Or would this have to go to a formal town council meeting?
Mayor, members of the council, at some point, either a use operation agreement would have to be entered into, or a lease, or some type of arrangement. At that time, a formal vote would be taken. All that's being requested tonight is just some guidance and direction to, as kind of the sense of the council as how they might proceed.
Thank you. So for the council tonight, any concerns? And Councilmember Cooper.
Well, I'm not saying it's potentially a concern, but it is probably next steps and that kind of thing. And before I go there, I want to just express my appreciation for the investigation and the studies and things that you've done since the last time we met. I appreciate it. And I also think that looks like a pretty cool design, and I'm supportive of that parcel. So I appreciate that. And so if the question today is what site do we support, that site by the police department is one I support. If the question is anything more than that, I'm not ready. You know what I mean? And so, because I think there's still a lot of questions that we need to answer and understand. And so what I think I hear is that you would like direction that this is a site, the site that we all kind of feel good about. And then you will do some even further kind of investigation as to what the costs are going to be, what kind of agreement might be needed, because as you know, stewards of the taxpayer dollar here, we have to understand what the expected financial position of the town is in this, and the worst case side of things is as well. So we can make a really smart decision before we take town property off the books, if you will, and put it into a use. And so that's where I'm at. I mean, I'm supportive of learning more about how this site, how we can move forward on this site.
Thank you. And as you said, you're ready to say that's your preferred site, and let's go to the next step to learn more. Other council members, are you in the same spot? Councilmember Daniels?
Obviously, Mayor, I'm very supportive of this particular site. And Councilmember Cooper, I don't think you're far off or asking too much. The goal of the organization now is once we have a designated site and permission from the council to move forward, we hope that that also comes with permission to utilize town staff and additional town resources in order to get to the next spot, because we do need this to be a partnership effort. Operation Welcome Home and the AZ Wall project are taking on the majority of all of that. We're paying for the design. We are not asking for any financial obligation from the town at all at this point. But when we do come forward with a final design, which will be voted on by the council, and we will also come forward with a hard and fast contract, if you will, or IGA, or whatever that ends up looking like. We will know more once we work with town staff in order to identify that and then bring it forward to council for a final vote. So again, not asking for anything else tonight other than, yes, move forward with this site, and yes, continue to work with town staff and utilize town resources as far as expertise, engineering, things like that to help us get to that next step.
Okay, thank you. And just as a follow-up, I would love to see at some point in the process, if options develop as to ways to go or whatever, I would love for us to have this kind of study session conversation about that, rather than maybe have everything all baked and then brought to us without, us having an opportunity for input along the way. And that's just kind of a thought. I think there was one more thing, but I'll stop there since I've lost it.
Well, we're just talking about baking. And so what we're saying is we want to help with the ingredients and see what sprinkles we could put on top, stuff like that. I mean, so we want to be involved. And I think that's what the committee would like to. So, looking to my right and left, I would, Town Manager Banjo, I'd say, proceed.
Mayor, members of the council, if I could ask for some clarification in regards to use of town staff and resources, is that something we should sit down and understand what the needs are and what support it's possible and appropriate for town staff to provide?
I think that's fine. I'm looking over your shoulder at Lisa. I don't believe it would be anything beyond what we've already been utilizing in order to get to this point, at least since the council retreat. Lisa, do you have anything?
That'd be correct. That's what we'd like to do.
Okay, so just so we're clear, this is an Operation Welcome Home project that the town is helping to support in various ways, but it's not a town project, so to speak. It's an Operation Welcome Home, and you'd like for us to just continue to support in the manner we have been.
Correct.
Okay.
The idea, though, is that once this is completed and Operation Welcome Home and the AZ Wall project have completed their end, that we will continue in a partnership, but that this will be a town-owned asset at that point.
Sure. Okay.
And as Mike said, we'll reach that point, and then a more formal agreement will be put in place that would be brought to the council meeting for a vote. Vice Mayor Cook?
And then, Patrick, what I'm thinking, because probably a lot of this is not per se budgeted, I'm thinking, I was talking to the mayor about our hotel tourism dollars that we're collecting, and I know we're getting more hotels that are coming in. Maybe, again, just as an option, some of that dollars could be used to help supplement for this. I'm just thinking that this could be, again, a great tourism play for us in using some of those dollars.
Councilmember Cooper?
Well, and I'll just, again, trying to watch out for the town's pocketbook a little bit here. I hesitate. What I'd love to see is when this comes to us that the funding sources are as identified as possible, so that we don't get in a situation where it gets half built and then the town and the taxpayers have to come in and finish it, because at that point you can't have a half-built wall, right? And so we need to, just like you would in a private development where you're not going to build a building until you get it 70% leased or whatever, something like that. We need to have some assurance before we take this asset of town property off the table and get it partially programmed or whatever. So I'm going to be looking for that as we move forward.
Councilmember Taylor.
Thank you, Mayor. Some of the math I was looking at was some of the operational expenses, and Rod and I have had some good discussions on what it takes to, keep our parks beautiful and first class. So I think some of his benchmarks of what per acre costs look like. I'd love to have you just check in with him so that we're looking at an operational cost that's on par with some of our other costs. I think there's some benefit there in that discussion.
Thank you. Councilmember Peterson.
Mayor, I appreciate many of the comments that have been offered. First of all, I appreciate all the work that's been done on this. There's so much work that's gone into this, is very obvious, so thank you. It's a lot easier for us to understand and make a decision from this additional work that's been done, so thank you. And just to some of the points that have been great, and just in the long term, the cost is a big concern. I mean, for me, I'm sure for others, it's been mentioned. We have a lot of needs in the town. We've got a lot of parks and rec needs in particular. We've got concerned about funding on that, and how you decide between a memorial to honor our veterans, which is extremely important, and just space for our kids to play in, things like that. That can be a really hard balancing act. So, I mean, the dollars are going to matter a lot, and not just the one time, but also the ongoing. And so, in general, I'm supportive of learning more about what this site would mean and what it would turn into. And I do think of the sites that have been presented, I think it's the best one. And but I just want to put that out there that I would never offer any kind of a blank check for any project, and just want to say that I'm supportive of learning more, and I appreciate the work that's been done, but we'll have to see how the details look,
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Please proceed.
Thank you so much.
Agenda item number 3, Land Development Code amendments for street widths and parking requirements. Please.
Well, thank you, Mayor, members of Town Council. I'm Jordan Feld. I'm a recent hire to the Planning Services Department, and so it's an honor to be giving you my first presentation. So with that, over the summer, Town Council asked staff to look at the issue of guest parking in single-family, typically the higher density single-family products we see, so SF6, SFD, and SFA. And analyzed kind of an anecdotal observation that the streets seem to be a little too narrow. There doesn't seem to be enough guest parking provisions if you go there at a busy time of Saturday morning or whatever. Literally no place to park. So that was the request to staff, as I said, over the summer, and so this is our first kind of follow-up. The ask, if you will, today is I'll be showing kind of some research we've already conducted, where we think we're going with the challenge in front of us and how we might mitigate it, some additional research we would take on, and just get your feedback on that. Do we get the point? Are we going to be looking at the right issues as we go forward with the Planning Commission for a possible text amendment? So very quickly, in terms of what I'll specifically go into today, the issue at hand, new subdivisions are not meeting visitor parking demand is our observation, and staff would tend to agree with that based on the initial research. We'll talk about kind of the diametric policies behind that, if you will, and why this jurisdiction and every jurisdiction is kind of experiencing this problem right now. We'll evaluate our existing requirements, look at other jurisdictions and what they're doing, and then some initial field observations, and then finally, what are some tools we can look at to mitigate this issue. So I referenced this opposing policy deal. The general plan, the long-range policy document for the town is chock full of different policies. These policies deal with smart growth, sustainability, compact urban form, healthy communities, walkability, pedestrian orientation, and we balance that against business efficiency, resource efficiency, cost to the developer, cost to the community, the idea that we want to be able to drive our cars wherever we want and that convenience. And so some of these goals that we have as a community, as an individual, they can't oppose each other. And so we've done well to get into smart growth, urban design in some of our subdivisions. Other subdivisions we have here in the town are more conventional in their design. And the general plan actually wants that. We want that diversity of housing types, that diversity of subdivision layout. So that's a good thing for the community. But again, it does present some challenges. One of those is the observed parking demand issue. So just by way of quick background, the single-family zoning districts we're talking about, SF6, SFD, and SFA, these are the basic parameters for these zoning districts. And then more in the heart of the matter, the parking requirements that we have today. And so these are pulled right out of the code. These are the applicable parking requirements, if you will. And just quickly going through them, on-street parking for visitors, visitor parking. On-street parking may be counted toward the visitor parking requirement. Again, right out of code, and then it specifies the stall width and length requirement for that space. And then jumping down to the primary parking section below it, these are these are actually the basic parking requirements, if you will. So for single family, where on-street parking is permitted, we require 2 enclosed spaces per unit. Where subdivision is not providing on-street parking, we require a ratio of guest parking to be provided, so 0.25 guest spaces per dwelling unit. What you'll notice here is the regulation does not speak to, if you are providing on-street parking, what is that parking requirement? So we go from, if you follow that? Yeah, okay. So that's kind of an issue we should be looking at, I think. And then when you look at the community itself, not arguably speaking, I mean, the socio-demographic statistics back this up. We tend to have larger households. We tend to drive larger cars. The 22-foot long by 8.5-foot wide stall with a 3-foot maneuvering area maybe doesn't work that great for the types of vehicles our community most frequently uses. So that's another thing we may want to look at. Again, just quickly going through this, and please feel free to yell at me, stop me if I'm going over something too quick or if you have questions. But just looking at other jurisdictions and what their guest parking requirements are for single family, we're not off. In fact, I would argue we're probably leading the way in terms of what we require for guest parking. So at least initially, it doesn't appear to staff that it's a ratio issue, although we'll keep that in the back of our minds. But just, again, looking at the statistics here, we're not off by any stretch. To kind of develop some initial observations, we looked at several subdivisions, more than just the 4 we're showing here. These 4 were just selected to show the range of developments that we looked at. We probably looked at a dozen approved in the town over the last 15 years or so. And they run the gamut from traditional neighborhood design, which is where we that type of design, if you will, traditional neighborhood design, where the streetscape really emphasizes pedestrian mobility and makes the streetscape this very public-oriented area and pushes the parking to someplace else, either in an alley, off the front of the lot where we're used to seeing it, puts it someplace else to give deference to the pedestrian. More traditional neighborhood design with a curvilinear street pattern. The lots front on the street, there's parking on the street. So we looked at all these different developments to try and discern, where are these issues really occurring, and it was pretty clear. Where we have this traditional neighborhood design with an alley, loaded garage, or an alley court, which is like a T driveway that multiple units take their frontage off of or take their access off of. That's where we're seeing a lot of these parking issues. What happens in these types of developments is the dumpsters start to compete with the parking that's been provided on street. You lose your driveway parking in a lot of cases. You can see here, this is Lions Gate. You can see the alley that serves the garages does not provide a driveway long enough to get an additional parking on your lot. So if you're using half your garage for storage and you've got 2 cars like most people do, your car is actually going to be using the guest parking provision that we had envisioned when we approved your development. Again, these auto courts do have these unique challenges. Again, the dumpsters, the lack of frontage, if you will, for parking in general creates issues, and the lot itself not having enough parking. One thing we observed that we didn't initially think about as we went into looking at this, but it was very clear as we looked at the aerials and did the tours, not all of our great active open space areas in our newer subdivisions have parking. In this particular case of Power Ranch, this great neighborhood park really, brings together this phase of the community, or this sub area of the community. It's a great park with a lot going on. You can see in the aerials, but no guest parking provisions, no on-street parking near the open space itself. So that's something we want to pay attention to going forward. Where there is identified active open space within a subdivision, we want to make sure that there's guest parking provided right there. Looking at other developments where the parking doesn't seem to be an issue and they've employed a good design criteria that seems to be working. This is Fincher Creek, and you can see parking clusters, and they're striped, and they're 90-degree parking stalls. Much easier for the guests to park in a 90-degree or angled stall than a parallel parking stall. Much easier to find a parking cluster than it is kind of scattered random parking spaces for visitors throughout the subdivision. So just summarizing the observations, there's this gap between the design theory, what we think we're going to get in terms of guest parking, and what actually happens in practice, whether it be people aren't good at parallel parking, so they're actually using up more spaces than we had planned for and approved, or a variety of reasons. So we need to close that gap between how we think we're regulating something and what's actually occurring in the field. Recognize that denser single-family development walks, talks, and smells a lot like lower density multifamily. And when you see a lower density multifamily project, you see striping and signage, and the parking begins to take on almost a commercial feel, if you want, in terms of how it's regulated, how it's designed, how it's allocated. And so part of the observation is maybe we should kind of move towards that for some of these denser single-family, alley-loaded projects. Start looking at signage for parking, striping for spaces, et cetera. And so all of that plays into this idea that there's probably opportunities for more design criteria for parking, specifically guest parking. And some of the other issues we maybe went into this thinking might be a problem. Are the alleys too narrow? Are private streets creating this problem? The minimum alley requirements, the minimum private drive requirements, the minimum right-of-way for a local street, these all tend to be the same in really every community. So that seems like a kind of fixed attribute in all this. Where we see some variability, again, is this parking design criteria. So some initial ideas on what we'll look at, and again, I talked about a couple of these already, but the ratio itself for the guest parking requirement, the parking stall dimensions, the maneuvering area with that stall, and then the requirements for stalls in the enclosed, on lot, your dwelling unit parking requirement. Are the stalls in the garage big enough? Is that garage big enough to handle what we're observing, what the contemporary family resident of Gilbert uses that garage as? And then finally, design criteria. So locating parking islands, angled on-street parking, providing more signage and striping, getting into where dumpster pads are located to maximize the amount of on-street parking, looking at the actual pedestrian route between a given dwelling unit and any guest space. And again, the active open space seems like a major issue where we have these great open space areas. We really want to make sure that visitors can park there. So again, pending feedback from the town council this evening, staff will brief the Planning Commission at its next study session, get their feedback, share with the Planning Commission any comments we receive this evening, and then staff will begin working on an actual legislative edit of the Land Development Code to start communicating some of these ideas. So with that, We wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and direction. Again, a pleasure to make the presentation this evening. Mayor, Town Council, happy to answer any questions.
Jordan, welcome to the team. Near the start of your presentation, you had a slide that had a picture of a donut and an apple. And you said opposing policies. I picked the donut. I don't know how the rest of the council feels, but Councilmember Peterson, you're probably going to pick the apple, but that would be a good example for me to follow. So with that slide of additional discussions occurring to the town council tonight, do you have any initial thoughts or feedback you'd like to give to Jordan? Councilmember Peterson. Is apple the choice that you picked?
If my wife is nearby,
okay,
probably. If not, it's probably the donut. Just had some questions. So, as I'm gathering that the problem that we are trying to solve is that there's not enough parking space for the demand, and I saw that in the slides. I guess what I'm still trying to understand, and maybe you can help me, what's the evidence? What's the trigger for this? What's the evidence of this problem? Help me understand that.
Great question, Mayor, Councilman Peterson. At this point, the data is really anecdotal. Although we can point to some existing subdivisions that have certainly contacted the town and said, we have a guest parking problem here, and you know, constituent services has gone out there. Planning has gone out to these different subdivisions. And you can even look at Google satellite aerials in some of these subdivisions. You can see the streets are full of cars, and that's a good thing. The guest parking is being utilized. But if I pull up a satellite from 10 a.m. on a random Tuesday, I probably shouldn't see as many cars as I do parked on the street. That tells me that a lot of it probably isn't guest parking. But to answer the greater question, this is coming from observations of town council, community members, HOA, board members that are saying, we don't seem to have enough supply for the demand we're seeing, whether it's on a given weekday or peak times. You think about it, a subdivision open space is a trip generator on a Saturday morning. You're having the birthday party there or whatever. If there's no parking there, we know there's going to be issues.
It's my understanding we've heard it from Public Works and Public Safety as well, with the trash can issue, and then also fire truck access, PD, maneuverability, things like that. I've heard it in multiple areas.
Thank you.
Has this been limited to certain subdivisions? Have we identified which ones? Have we kept a record of where the complaints are and what? I'm just trying to understand the data a little bit more, because that will help us hone in on the problem and what actual problems are. I mean, we can say there's not enough parking, but are there problems it's creating other than an annoyance, or what can you tell me about that?
Sure, Mayor, Councilman Peterson, appreciate the more detailed question. There are, and we'll come back to you with a more kind of thorough, here are the examples that we looked at and what's driving some of these concerns as they're coming into the town. But there have been, in my recollection, 3 distinct subdivisions where they were approved at the planning and planning level. They looked fine, they met code, and then for different reasons in practice, they haven't been able to perform as expected with respect to guest parking. In a specific case, it was the adoption of CC&Rs after the fact that prohibited on-street parking, but that's, in my mind, an outlier issue, because whether it's the town or other zoning authorities I've worked for, all of the zoning codes are starting to catch up with these alley-loaded projects that were approved in the early 2000s. And the lowest common denominator for the issue, and I realize I'm not talking about how did this issue come to us, but what is my observation of it. All of them have had this kind of learning period where they figure out they need to apply more multifamily oriented guest parking requirements to a higher density single family product. Our code doesn't currently do that. So therein lies, a basic issue. But again, to your question, is there a long list of complaints that we've gotten? No, it's from, there's a list from the community, a list from staff, a list from town council, all of it being, I tried to get to my friend's house on a Tuesday and I couldn't find a guest parking space, or we had a party on a Saturday and there's nowhere to park.
And what about, you mentioned that there's a learning curve there for zoning administrators perhaps, but what feedback do we get from the development community? I mean, is there also a learning curve there, and are they redesigning product, and do they agree there was a problem, and are they changing? What do we know from that end? I mean, developers and any business does well when they make their customers happy, and this sounds like a lot of unhappy customers, so I'm just trying to understand, is there a shift going on there as well? Is there an agreement that there was a problem? Can you fill me in on that?
Yeah, again, great questions. We have not officially reached out to the development community with this potential text amendment yet. That would certainly be part of this once we identify specific changes, again, with town council direction that we would want to make. My feeling is, to the degree that we're approaching this in a somewhat cost neutral, in other words, yeah, it's a little bit more expensive to stripe something and put a sign up, or to take, kind of random guest parking and put it in clusters. My sense is the development community is going to be much more positive with regards to that approach than let's make the streets wider, let's add some fixed cost up front to your projects to address this issue that really only comes up after you walk away from the project. The economics there probably aren't the best for that discussion, but to the degree that we're approaching this as, there seems like there's some incremental minor changes we can make to how we design and regulate guest parking criteria without a lot of additional expense to the developer. My sense is that would be somewhat well received by the development community, but to your point, we have not had that discussion yet, so we don't know what their reactions will be.
I guess that would be lead to my last question. I'm a limited government conservative. I think the market can address most problems. There is a category of problem that cannot solve well, and that's externalities. But I'm not sure this is one. That's an externality being something that neither the buyer nor seller pay the cost of. And the buyer's going to pay the cost of this design, and so that's going to lead to demand from buyers for something different and better. So I'm trying to understand, what is it that leads us to believe the market's not going to correct this on its own? Can you help me with that?
Mayor, Councilman Peterson, in fact, I think you do see these projects built more recently bringing in the requirements that I'm talking about. And in a longer presentation, I would show you some aerials of alley-loaded projects or traditional neighborhood design projects that were single-family that did have the clusters, the striping, the signage, some of these other kind of minor design elements that make a huge difference in terms of the actual utilization of guest parking. So will the market eventually correct itself or start to correct itself on this? Yeah, but at the same time, I think there's risk to the town in creating potential traffic safety issues by not trying to be proactive about addressing this issue.
Councilmember Taylor.
Mayor, thank you. I think Jordan gets an A on his presentation for the first time, so thank you for that. And I appreciate the line of questioning. I think the general theme does make a little bit of sense, and if we can get really specific on what problems we're solving, I think the answers will come out. And I see a lot of answers out there, and so I think maybe a little bit more research on what are the exact themes that we're seeing from the anecdotal feedback. I think that might be helpful. That would just be my offering here in terms of direction to staff.
Thank you. Councilmember Daniels.
Thanks. I think you hit the nail on the head, Jordan, when you said that SF6, SFD, and SFA oftentimes function like multifamily, but they don't have the same type of parking requirement as multifamily. And so while the data is being compiled, we don't need necessarily a data-driven model for our Public Works Department to tell you that they have a difficult time picking up trash in a neighborhood where there are a long string of cars, or that 7 or 8 cars in a row will be broken into in one night because they're all along the street. And so I've lived in highly dense areas before, and parking is always an issue. Particularly in areas where you have a high density of maybe students or rental properties. And so when we're having this conversation, I immediately think about our Cooley Station area that has yet to be developed. And yet we have an opportunity now to mitigate some of the difficulties with parking that we may have, because that may or may not be a high-density, student-centered parking, living area. And at that point, you get 4, 5, 6 individuals in a unit, all with their own vehicle. And so I would like to see us address this not just by type of housing, although I think that's an excellent, but also the target audience of the housing. We do that with multifamily now. Quantity of bedrooms, whether this will be student parking, and then we always have an opportunity to also address this issue by adding more mass transit, which I think is the more expensive route than trying to mitigate the parking issue, at least right now. And so from a townwide perspective, I think that we just need to give perhaps additional options or put some more tools in the toolbox for developers to be able to utilize. Once it's built, to your point, Councilmember Peterson, once it's built, unless we're taking out tot lots or building over, drainage and retention basins, there's not a whole lot of solutions to the problem, because you've got homes and people living there, and it becomes a much more difficult problem to solve. But I could list 10 neighborhoods right now where this is a major issue, and where you're having people's automobiles broken into, where there's 4, sometimes 5, 6 people living, and really no street frontage parking, no driveways to park in, things like that. So I appreciate the direction that's being taken. I've probably whined about this issue many times over the last couple of years, only because I've seen it be impactful to neighborhoods. And so I'm grateful that we're taking a look at what some of the toolbox options might be.
Thank you. Okay. Carry on. And before we conclude the study session, Thursday night, 5:30, Operation Welcome Home. Canceled. Okay, thank you. 6:30, Student Citizen of the Month. Yes. And then at the end of Student Citizen of the Month, Councilmember Taylor, a couple of minutes to have a reminder of something that happened 200 years ago related to the national anthem. So you're on. Okay. And if it spills into slightly the regular town council meeting, that's the current event part. Because we didn't take a formal vote, we just gave direction, I'm returning to something that we talked about, and I'll just bring it up quickly. This is back to the calendar, where we had that 2-1 vote on April 16th as opposed to April 14th. I learned something new, and the reason why Councilmember Taylor was the 1 vote is that he did rely on the calendar and has scheduled a work opportunity that will take him out of town on the 16th. So that, sometimes we're not able to make it to every meeting, but I don't know if that, for 2 or 3 of us that it didn't matter, would we want to consider going back to April 14th? All right, now, back to, we were doing this experiment. If we go to a Tuesday night of doing it at 5 o'clock, does that work? So Tuesday, April 14th at 5 o'clock. When we've done Tuesday, it was kind of a study session, but we didn't want to do it at 4, move it more to 5. And we're doing it, we did it August 18th, and we're doing it December 2nd. Okay, so we did a rewind, and to our town clerk, let's shift it back to April 14th at 5 p.m. And to our town attorney, just to make sure I do this proper, do we adjourn the special meeting in our executive session, or should I do it right now?
Mayor, members of the council, do that now, and then
okay.
We will go into executive session in our next meeting.
We adjourn our special meeting. Is there a motion to reconvene into executive session? There's a motion and a second. Thank you.